Hello, it's Lexi at Cozy Tea Cafe, and today we're going to be going over an Onyx Storm summary. This is the third book in the Empyrean series, so there are going to be loads of spoilers in here for Fourth Wing, Iron Flame, Onyx Storm, all of it. This is going to be going through Onyx Storm start to finish with all of the plot points. So if you don't want spoilers, please pass this video up. Also, I'm going to just make a note here that I physically read this book. I did not listen to the audio, so please bear with me for the pronunciations of all of these names. If I get something wrong, don't be mean to me. We're just going to jump right in and get started. This book starts immediately following the events of Iron Flame. So Xaden is now Venin, and Violet follows Xaden down to the interrogation chamber after the battle at Basgiath. She's talking to Andarna through the bond, and Andarna says that she scorched a Venin in battle, which they have not been able to do until now. Andarna says her magic feels different when she changes colors, and she thinks she might be the answer to saving Xaden, but she wants to find her family to get answers about her kind. Violet overhears Xaden talking to Jack Barlow in the interrogation chamber, asking for a cure, and Jack is warning him and taunting him that he'll destroy Violet. After the battle, dragons and riders take turns patrolling for Venin and killing them when found. While the whole squad is visiting Sawyer in the infirmary after he lost his leg at the battle, someone screams from the other room and shouts that they're all dead. Violet sees a body with a gray handprint and realizes Venin must be within the walls of Basgiath. Her squad runs towards the screaming cadet, and Violet realizes the Venin are disguising themselves as scribes, and she starts throwing daggers at them. Xaden comes in and starts fighting too, and between him and the squad, all of the Venin are killed, but most of the already wounded infantry is dead. In an excerpt, we learn that the 6 most powerful signets have walked the continent simultaneously only once. Violet is summoned to the council room, and Xaden heads there with her. Garrick tries to convince Violet to reconsider her sleeping arrangements because Xaden is now Venin, but Violet refuses. The council tells Violet that Melgren wants Grady to lead a task force to find the 7th dragon breed in an attempt to understand how to kill Venin. Violet will join the task force with Andarna, but won't be able to give any demands because she's still in trouble for leaving Basgiath with half of their riders. Violet says Andarna has a list of demands that she needs to be met before agreeing, and Llewellyn and Melgren say they'll try to approve them. Xaden and Violet wake up, and they start to get intimate for the first time since Xaden turned Venin, but he abruptly tells her to stop, and she moves away. She notices on the headboard that a piece of the wood is lighter, meaning that Xaden accidentally channeled from the wood. Violet receives a missive from King Tori saying she has 3 days to uphold her end of the bargain, but it isn't revealed yet what that bargain is. Mira finds Violet, and Violet asks if she has it, and Mira says she does and shows a wooden disc with 3 runes on it. 1 for warmth, 1 for levitation, and 1 for sound shielding. She was able to work with another rider who has a plant wielder signet to nullify the warmth rune without affecting the others. This was supposedly what the missive from Tori was about, but it's still not completely revealed what they're doing. Violet says the Flyers will be able to stay now that the runes can be tampered with, and she'll be able to keep her deal with Dracarys. While Violet and the rest of her squad are together, she makes a comment about one of the Venin having silver hair, and Riddick brushes this off, saying that everyone's hair turns gray eventually. Sloane and Baylor alert them that Aura Beanhaven is trying to challenge a Griffin Flyer, and they all run out to the courtyard, and there isn't any leadership around, and Aura has her blade to a first-year Flyer's throat. Dane tries to talk her down, but she calls him a deserter and challenges him instead. Wielding is not allowed during challenges, but there is no leadership present to supervise, so Aura takes off her glove and tries to fire wield him with her signet. Violet throws a dagger and pins her glove to a tree before she's able to wield, and Violet says that if she's going to wield, then she'll be dealing with her. Violet makes an announcement to the cadets, urging people to trust the Flyers. Professors Kaori, Amaterio, and Devera break up the rising tensions and offer some insight into what's to come. They say that a lightning and a shadow wielder haven't fought side by side since the Great War, and this is news to Violet. Violet sees Xaden and Brennan emerge from negotiations and approaches them with Auric, asking for any updates. They say that Halden, who is King Tori's son, heir to the throne, and Aric's brother, made things difficult, but they told Aric that his secret is still safe, and King Tori has his guards out searching for him elsewhere. Violet seems shaken by the fact that Halden is there, and Brennan tells her that Halden will be joining her mission to search for the 7th dragon breed, and Aric suspects that this is because they'll be venturing to the Isle Kingdoms, and they will need some sort of royal present to speak on behalf of Navarre. They also say that all of Andarna's demands were met, including free reign to hunt the King's Forest, and pardoning all riders that abandoned Basgiath. As for the alliance between the Flyers and the Riders, it was not accepted. The council said that they will reevaluate at a later date because they could not come to a decision in the time span that was allotted by the Queen. Xaden tells her that they granted him his old title of Duke and basically giving him all of Tyrrendor. Xaden is terrified because he's now a Venin, and he says that he couldn't refuse or else they'd suspect something, but he makes Violet promise that she'll sound the alarm if he turns bad. At night, Imogen, Meryn, Violet, Rhiannon, and Riddick head to the infirmary to find Sawyer to enact the next part of their plan. They tell Sawyer that Mira was able to find a way to nullify runes without affecting other surrounding runes, and they ask for his help removing a rune from the Wardstone. He's hesitant, but he agrees, and they go down to the Wardstone chamber, and they see Mira and Brennan, who are already there. Sawyer successfully removes the rune that nullifies flyer magic, which is essentially committing treason, but this is also going to allow negotiations for an alliance to continue. The next day in Battle Brief, Dever announces that alliance negotiations are back on, and Colonel Atos, who is now General Atos, enters and says Violet is being arrested for high treason against Navarre. Atos takes her to the Cenarium, which Xaden is now a member of, and they dismiss Atos. On the table in front of the Cenarium is Violet's patch from her jacket that they had found at the scene of the crime. Violet confesses and says that she orchestrated the whole thing, no one else, and Xaden says that there's nothing that they can do since Violet committed the crime last night and everyone in the room signed a pardon for all of the riders this morning. Queen Mireia enters and tells Violet that she knew of the deal that she had with Dracarys to get the Flyers to stay at Basgiath by whatever means necessary, in exchange for full access to his library, which is the best on the continent. Atos says that just because the Cenarium pardoned them doesn't mean they won't be punished. He says that as General of Basgiath, he's sending their squad to Samara for active duty for 2 days. When they get there, they're exhausted from riding, and the colonel on duty at Samara says the fighting stopped about a day ago. Violet brings her squad to Xaden's room, and she has a nightmare of her and Kat in a burning building, while Violet is desperately trying to find this painting of her family. She wakes up and leaves her room and overhears a pair of riders say that Newhall is being evacuated after reports of smoke. Meryn's family is there, so they all decide to fly there and help the civilians because the riders at Samara are all either too busy or too exhausted from their previous fighting. Violet and Taryn fly ahead, and they approach the village, and they start to encounter Wyvern. Violet starts killing them with her lightning and sees the silver-haired Venin, who waves, seemingly expecting them, and Violet realizes that this might be a trap. Garrick and his dragon arrive, and they fight alongside them, while Taryn and Violet get sucked into a tornado, and then they are flung out at high speed, hurtling towards a mountainside. So at the last second, Taryn shifts, so he takes the brunt of the impact, but he's knocked out, making their bond go dark, and at this point, Violet doesn't know if he's dead or alive. Violet tells Andarna to stay away, and when they finally hit the ground, Garrick approaches and says that his dragon is also knocked out from the impact, but he helps Violet out of her saddle and pops her dislocated knee back into place. Andarna alerts Violet that the other riders are approaching, but they don't know that Garrick is with them, and she has not told them yet either. Violet questions how Garrick's brown scorpion tail blocked out the rest of his riot. Garrick says that Xaden ordered him to fly here when he found out that Violet was being sent beyond the wards. Garrick says that Xaden is not himself, and he completely lost it when Violet was sent beyond the wards. Violet then says that they only crossed the wards about 40 minutes ago, which doesn't explain how Garrick got there so quickly when he was supposed to be at least an 8-hour ride away. However, their conversation is interrupted when a silver-haired Venin approaches them and reveals that she killed Meryn's parents, but she left Meryn's brothers alive as a sign of goodwill. She says that her name is Theophany and asks about Violet's dragon, the Irid. Andarna says that she remembers now. Her kind are called irids, short for iridescent, and she is an irid scorpion tail. Violet screams through the bond for her to fly for the wards because the Venin are after Andarna, not Violet. Theophany wields lightning and levitates Garrick and tells Violet that when her and Xaden join the Dark Wielders, to remember that she let her live and choose her as their teacher. She says that she can give Violet control and knowledge. A wyvern then descends and plucks Theophany from the ground, and they flee. Violet turns to Garrick and asks if the reason he was able to get there so quickly was because of a second signet that allows him to distance wield, explaining why his dragon wouldn't alert the riot of his arrival. He doesn't confirm or deny this, but Violet tells him to fly off now before the riot gets there so his secret can remain safe. Violet asks Xaden about Garrick's second signet, and he confirms this. She also asks about Liam, saying that she once saw him wield ice, and Xaden also confirms this. He says that most riders with rebellion relics have two signets, but not all of them, which is why he wasn't questioned when he didn't present with a second one. Xaden is sent to the front lines, and Violet receives a letter from him saying that he was near a burnout during battle, and he's recovering in seclusion. She reads between the lines here and realizes that he slipped and channeled and is basically hiding out until his eyes go back to normal. Jasenia was removed from the Adept path in the Scribe Quadrant after failing nearly possible exams that Markham gave her as punishment for fleeing Basgiath and choosing Orisha. Jasenia says there is an account of an Isle Kingdom aiding the Second Croveland Uprising, but pages were removed and it's now incomplete. The only scribe who might have this information is Violet's father, and his work is hidden in her parents' old quarters. And those quarters are now being occupied by the acting general of Basgiath, which is General Atos. In Battle Brief, Deveris says that there will be new texts and classes added to their schedule, since high-level Venin are confirmed to wield signets. They also will go to Orisha periodically for rune training. And she says that a new professor will be teaching signet against signet combat, and that professor is Xaden. So Violet is relieved that Xaden figured out a way to stay within the wards, but she realizes that their relationship now has to be over because a professor and a rider are strictly forbidden from having a relationship in the Codex. Xaden's request for an exception to the Codex is denied directly by Atos, and General Atos requires loyalist riders to watch them and ensure that they're not breaking the rules. Dane agrees to help Violet steal her father's research from his father's quarters, and he says that he'll get more information on how to do this. Professor Grady, who is now leading the squad to find the Irids, says that they're going to start their search north, but Violet feels like they should go south towards the southern Isle of Deverelli after reading the passage from Jasenia that said that they may have aided in the Second Croveland Uprising. Xaden starts teaching signet training, and he's teaching the cadets to spot weaknesses in the other signets so they can defeat the Venin on the battlefield. When it's Violet's turn, he uses his shadows to block her sight and tries to teach her how to find him in the darkness. When she asks why she's the only one that's getting this training, he says it's because she's the only one capable of killing him. While taking some time off to relax at the pub, Dane approaches Violet and tells her that he's been doing some recon on the security in his father's chambers and says that there's absolutely no way to sneak someone outside of the bloodline in without alerting them. He asks Violet to trust him and says he'll retrieve it and bring it to her. While she doesn't fully trust him, she decides to go out on a limb and tell him where the secret compartment in her father's desk is so he can retrieve the work. Dane gets the journal and passes it off to Jasenia, who then passes it off to Violet to avoid suspicion. The journal has a magic blocking rune on it that requires a 6-letter code to open it that will destroy the journal if it's incorrectly answered. There's a piece of paper underneath this lock that has a note that reads, "First love is irreplaceable." She thinks that Lilith and Violet are too easy of answers and knows that her dad would want her to overthink it. She asks her squad for help, and they ask about her siblings' first loves, and none of those answers fit. They then ask about Violet's first love, and she refuses to say anything. Arik makes a comment and says that 6 letters would fit for Violet's first love, but before they can continue their discussion, signet training with Professor Xaden and Garrick starts. They hear clapping and Halden arrives. He sits by Violet and talks to her, and without explicitly spelling it out, it's pretty clear that there is some history between them and that he cheated on her with a professor after his twin was killed by Xaden. By the way, he still does not know that it was Xaden who killed his twin. He asks if she's really with Xaden, and Violet replies by saying that she's in love with him, but she is abiding by the Codex and they are not together. He says that he's asking this for himself because he wants to take her out and apologize. He tries to brush her hair away from her face, but Xaden sees this and sends a shadow hurtling towards his chest and knocks him off the bench. Xaden approaches Halden and says that Violet hasn't thought about him once since she set eyes on himself. Violet and Rhiannon figure out her father's riddle by using her mom's dragon's name as the code. Aimsir, I believe. The journal opens and they see a draft of the history of the Second Croveland Uprising. Violet also finds a handwritten letter addressed to her. The letter tells her that she'll find the link between the uprising and the pursuit for Feathertails in between the lines of his work. He says that if he and her mom are both dead while she's reading this, and if she seeks the weapon to defeat those from the lore, she needs to ride quickly to Deverelli by way of Corden and bring her rarest item to a merchant named Narelle Anselm. He says if she's there under the banner of Navarre to beware their king because he holds a grudge. Lastly, he says to only trust Mira. Xaden shows up at Violet's door and she rushes him in before anyone can see. He asks if she ever loved Halden, and Violet realizes that he's jealous. She reassures him and tells him about her father's letter. Xaden agrees to go with her and to do anything to get answers. Grady and the rest of the squad head out on a mission beyond the wards to get an artifact from a destroyed city, Anka. They have a map drawn by Kat, who has been to Anka and has seen the artifact before. Grady warns all of them to not wield unless they are faced with death, because wielding will alert the Venin of their exact location. Violet and Aura are paired up and they're looking for the artifact, and Aura is very visibly scared and jumpy, and she has her hands ready to wield. Violet warns her to put her gloves back on because wielding will get them all killed. Mira announces that she's found the artifact, and Grady opens a door and it is immediately slammed shut, and the noise scares Aura, so she turns and wields while Violet tries to stop her, but it's too late. She wields her fire at Grady, and he goes up into flames and dies. The wind is really heavy, so the entire city starts to catch on fire while dragons try to pick up their riders from the city center. Mira gets on her dragon first, and when Aura tries to run for her dragon, a wyvern picks her up and she's killed by its talons. Everyone else gets on their dragon and flees, and when they're back within the wards, Mira shows Violet that the artifact has a note attached to it from Theophany, and it says that she can take her whenever she wishes, and that she can give Violet the answer she needs. Xaden is concerned because this means that she knew that they were going to be there. Riddick begs Violet to convince the Cenarium to let him join the mission because he says bad things happen when their squad is apart. He freezes the water within an orange, and everyone is shocked because that's not a normal ice wielder ability. He says he's always been able to pull water from the air, and when Violet asks if he could freeze the water in someone's body, he says that he hasn't tried it yet, but he assumes that he could in theory. Violet meets with the Cenarium, who have Halden, Markham, and Atos in attendance. She says their squad failed miserably and demands a squad of her choosing. She chooses herself, Mira, Xaden, Riddick, Kat, Kat's cousin Drake, Dane, Halden, and a guard of Halden's choosing. They're reluctant, but they agree. The squad heads out, and the Flyers have a hard time keeping up, especially since their griffins are carrying Halden and his guard in a basket by their talons. They're flying all the way through to Corden because Violet and Xaden are scared that he'll channel if he touches down for too long. They reach Takaris' palace in Corden, and Xaden baits Halden into losing his temper, which leads to Halden telling Xaden that he has no authority there and he does not come as a professor or any other title. Xaden then uses this admission as a chance to share a room with Violet for the night, since it's no longer off limits. While in their room, Xaden responds to something that Violet said in her head, which is the second time this has happened so far. He seems confused, not realizing that he even did it, and says that he did not push to read her intentions. She said his signet must be growing stronger. Takaris tells Xaden that it's not appropriate for a prince in line for the throne to show up in a basket, and suggests that he take Halden and the guard on one of his ships to get a head start. As the riders and their dragons are crossing the ocean, Violet feels her power fade as magic doesn't exist off the continent. Andarna begins to plummet since dragons lean on magic for strength, and Taryn straps her into the harness on his chest. All of the dragons are cut off from each other, no one can wield, and none of the riders can communicate with their dragons besides Violet, Taryn, and Andarna for some reason. That is never explained. Hopefully we'll get an explanation in the next book. While Halden is meeting with the king, the rest of the squad heads to town to find the merchant that Violet's dad wrote about. Xaden seems at peace without the weight of magic and thus being Venin weighing on him. They find the merchant, but when they ask to see her, they're attacked by some of the workers in the shop. An old woman emerges and sees Violet and says that she must be Asher Sorengale's daughter, here to collect the books that her dad wrote for her. The merchant says that her dad gave her strict instructions for only giving Violet the books if she has obtained the knowledge needed to comprehend them. She asks Violet 3 questions. The first is about the title of his manuscript. The second is about the Crovlin uprising falling apart because of Deverelli, and she says that the manuscript didn't go into specifics, and she asks Violet what her theory is, and Violet says that she suspects Crovla promised dragons to Deverelli, and they didn't deliver, so Deverelli withdrew from their brokerage. The third question is why Violet left the prince, and she responds by saying she found him in a compromising position with his professor. She gives Violet the 6 books, and they're all password locked. Without magic to worry about, Xaden and Violet can be intimate again without the worry of Xaden losing control and channeling, but afterwards they are interrupted by a knock on the door, and the whole squad tells them that a messenger arrived and said the king decided to keep Halden, and the only aristocrat that he agreed to talk to is Xaden. Xaden and Violet arrive, and the king says that he caught Halden's guard stealing artifacts from the treasury with a list of items written in Halden's handwriting. He killed the guard and fed her to his panthers at the dinner table, and then he stabs Halden through the hand and makes him remove the blade himself. Halden storms off and breaks any chance of an alliance. Xaden asks the king to ally with Tyrandor instead, and says he will be responsible for all of the riders and flyers that enter Deverelli. Halden has another outburst, and the king says to kill them all besides Takaris. Violet, Halden, and Xaden manage to incapacitate the guards without killing them, but then another wave of guards rolls in. Violet's conduit was broken in the initial fight, and Halden is now knocked unconscious on the floor. Xaden channels from the conduit and kills all 12 instantly, and the king is shocked, saying that there isn't any magic on the island. Xaden has his eyes squeezed shut, and Violet directs him to Sigale and tells him to go back to Navarre, saying she'll meet him there within a week. Violet then turns to the king and says that she'd like to resume negotiations. Andarna swoops in and picks up one of the panthers in her jaw. She's not harming her, but she's threatening to. Violet tells the king that she wants the alliance in return for the citrine artifact that she brought, and says she'll also give him the one and only dragon eggshell for the 7th dragon breed, the Irids, as an apology for Halden's behavior. She asks for a full pardon on Xaden's actions from tonight, and allowance for him to return during their missions. The king agrees, but says that Halden is never welcome back, and Violet agrees to this. The king says he has one more trade he might be able to broker with her. Back at Besgaiath, Violet relays to the rest of the squad that the king wanted to trade her and Xaden's services for weaponry. In battle brief, Devera says that the Venin are stationed outside of Orisha as if they know the Orishan wards will fall. In signet training, Violet asks Bodhi about his second signet, and he says that he doesn't have one. Xaden shows up, and the flecks in his eyes are amber, not the usual gold, so Violet knows that he's getting worse, and he's not recovering as much after accidentally slipping and channeling. Bodhi gives Violet 2 vials, a serum and an antidote that was used in the last book that blocks riders from their signets and from their dragons. Bodhi says to use these on Xaden if he progresses. He tells her to bring Garrick on their mission in case she's unable to do it. While Carr is wielding at a 2nd year for signet training, the 2nd year channels directly from the earth, and they immediately kill her. They need to get ready to head out for the Isles again, but they've concocted a plan to disobey direct orders and not report back after every Isle mission in order to save time and get information faster. While they're about to leave, Xaden and Halden get in an argument, and Arik's dragon lands, and Arik finally reveals himself to Halden, saying that he's taking over as the royal correspondent, since Halden has been banned from Deverelli and doesn't know how to rein in his temper. They fly off and land on the Isle of Dune, and Mira tells Violet that she took leave to talk to their estranged grandmother, but won't tell her much else. There is obvious tension between Mira and Violet, presumably because their father left the journals specifically for Violet and not Mira. The squad is camped on the beach, waiting to hear if they're welcome on the Isle when they're attacked by someone, but Xaden is quicker and holds a knife to their throat. There are about a dozen guards who tell them that they're not welcome, but Xaden says they want an audience with the Queen, and the guards deny them. Xaden says that he knows the laws and says that they can challenge a guard, and if they win, they'll receive the privileges of that person's ranking. The guards are sort of impressed that they know the laws, and they take Xaden, Auric, Violet, Dane, and Kat to the arena, leaving behind Mira, Drake, Traeger, Marin, and Garrick. When they get there, there are robed attendants on the terrace, and every single one of them has silver hair. There are also brunette children running around with silver tips at the end of their hair, just like Violet's, but for whatever reason, she doesn't think to ask any questions about this. Auric volunteers to fight Dune's champion to win an audience with the Queen, but Xaden convinces Auric that it should be him instead because Auric is in line for the throne. The old priestess cuts Xaden's arm, marking him as a fighter, then cuts Dane as well, saying that he's going to fight too. She asks Violet if she chose this path for herself, and when Violet responds yes, she cuts her too, marking her to fight. Dane and Xaden are up against two twin fighters, and Violet is up against a tall female fighter. Violet has her opponent pinned, while Dane is knocked unconscious, and Xaden's opponent is about to plunge a knife in his throat. So instead of ending her opponent, Violet throws a dagger at Xaden's opponent, and lightning starts crashing all around them from a storm. Violet tells her opponent to yield, and eventually she does. Violet then realizes that her opponent was actually the Queen, who then agrees to let them station there. She says that they haven't seen dragons in centuries and won't ally with Navarre without the promise of dragons. She asks how she wielded the lightning, and Violet says that she didn't, it was just a coincidence. The Queen points to a charred statue and says that it stood for 700 years without falling, meaning that the lightning was no coincidence. The Queen says she wants 12 dragon eggs, 2 from each breed, and Violet recalls her dad's journals, saying that the Isle of Dune was looking for feathertails, which Violet now knows is because they believe feathertails to be more malleable. They obviously decline the offer, but the Queen says when they're more desperate, they'll be happy to give the eggs away to save the rest of the dragons. Traeger and Kat are seen holding hands, and we find out that they're dating. They fly to Hedotus, the Isle of Peace and Wisdom, and one of the triumvirate members approaches to welcome them and offers a place to stay in his home. He introduces his family and calls over his wife, Talia, who's shocked when she sees Xaden, and they clearly recognize each other. Garrick recognizes her too because she's Xaden's mom. Xaden has refused to talk to his mom, and his mom asks Violet to convince him to attend a dinner with her, and Xaden reluctantly agrees. Xaden tells Violet that him and his mom used to be very close and they would drink iron mint tea together, but on his 10th birthday, his mother fed him chocolate cake and then fled in the night, and he hasn't seen her since. They see 2 kids run out, and Talia runs after them, and they call her mom, which hurts Xaden to know that she had more kids after she left him. At dinner, the triumvirate is there, and they're using this opportunity as their test, because everyone on the island needs to be tested before they're given favor. There is obvious tension between Xaden and his mom, and she says that she couldn't take him with her because he was the heir, but she also couldn't stay because she would have been executed alongside Xaden's dad, Fen Ryerson. The triumvirate starts saying Xaden's choices regarding his betrothal to Kat were very unwise, and says that he should reconsider a contract for a 3 to 4 year marriage with Kat to ensure an heir. He says that he'll only contract with Violet for life and nothing else. There is an argument around the table, and Mira interrupts with a speech about all of their wise actions over the past year or so, and all the accomplishments that they've made, and the triumvirate is pleased by this and asks Violet what she thinks about their city. She doesn't hold back. She says it's cruel and it shows their disregard for anything that they don't deem beautiful and efficient. The Isles keep referring to the continent as Amoralis because they worship Amari above all else, and all of the other Isle kingdoms are named after gods. 2 of the 3 triumvirate have passed them on their test, but Phallus, who is Talia's husband, says that he needs more convincing. One of the triumvirate members asks the servers to bring out dessert, and asks if Talia made something with all of the chocolate that she's been shipping in over the past few weeks. Servers bring out the chocolate cake, and Talia says that she hopes it's still Xaden's favorite. Violet realizes that something is wrong here. None of the triumvirate have forks, and she puts two and two together and realizes that the chocolate was shipped weeks ago, meaning that she knew Xaden was coming and was probably alerted by Devarelli, meaning that she just put on a show on the beach when she seemed shocked to see him. Violet knows something's wrong, so she tries to subtly tell everyone not to eat the cake, but Garrick is already a third of the way done, and she tells him to stop, but it's too late. He drops to the floor and he isn't breathing. The triumvirate reveal that they added a poison to the cake, and Talia had no idea. They say he'll be dead soon, but Violet reveals the Aran mint tea she gave them as a peace offering from Xaden before dinner was actually mixed with an herb that made it poisonous, and they all begin vomiting. Violet offers to give them an antidote in exchange for the antidote for Garrick, but Ferris is too stubborn and he refuses. He said he'd rather die. They check the kitchen for clues, and they find a cook with blue dye on his nails, and the cook attacks them. Violet stabs the cook in the forearms and pins his hand, and the cook stabs Riddick, but the blade gets stuck in Riddick's jacket, which they note as very lucky. Violet figures that the blue poison is fermented zakia berries, and she uses her dad's field book to get the antidote, which is figs. Ferris is pissed that she found this out, and he is still without an antidote. Garrick wakes up and Xaden almost kills Ferris, but Violet talks him down, and she sees that his eyes are devoid of emotion, and the venom in him is slowly taking over in these, moments of anger. Violet tells Ferris that Andarna is outside of his son's window at his parents' house, ready to strike if they don't allow them to fly off in peace. He refuses to accept that he was beaten, but Violet offers the antidote, and after he realizes that he's cornered and there's no other way, he has to accept. They flee, and then they fly to the Isle of Zortris of Zelna, who worship the god of luck, and they land in a large arena that's already half full of people expecting them. When they land, they feel the pulse of magic, and the dragons and griffins are able to talk to their riders again. Violet and Xaden are also able to communicate through the bond again. A woman named Calixta approaches, and Auric responds fluently. She tells Violet in the common tongue that they would be happy to aid them, and they have always revered dragonkind, but before they can talk to their queen about negotiations, the squad must test their luck in the arena with a random game. Calixta tells them that they'll each draw a card to receive a gift, but they aren't allowed to complain about that gift, regardless of what it is. They begin drawing, and they receive various gifts. Mira gets wine, Dane gets a slap, and Violet gets a broken compass. When it's Traeger's turn, he draws an arrow and is shot through the heart before anyone has time to react. They can't react or complain about their gifts, so Violet has to thank Calixta as Traeger lays there dead and his griffin lies there dying. Drake has to cover Kat's mouth while she screams because that's her boyfriend. After it's over, Auric strikes a favorable alliance for them to come to Navarre's aid, and they all sleep in the arena by Traeger in his griffin's body. Kat says that they're going to fly to an unoccupied isle to burn their bodies there. They land on an uninhabited beach, and there's a bit of magic there. The dragons burn Traeger and Celerane's bodies, and they agree to break off in groups of 2 to search for the Irids. Violet says that Xaden will go with Garrick, and she'll go with Riddick. Violet is with Andarna while she's napping, and suddenly the beach rumbles while tracks are being made in the sand. A dragon appears before them, seemingly out of thin air, with 6 other dragons behind it, and this means that the Irids have found them. The Irids are able to speak to everyone through a bond, and Andarna tells them of her story. When she's done with her story, she asks if she's passed their test, and they said they were not testing her, they were testing her human. One of the female dragons says their breed is born for peace, not violence. She says that Violet took advantage of her as an adolescent and stunted her growth as a result. She said they left her egg behind as a criterion and hoped she'd one day return to tell them that humans had learned peace, but she sees that that obviously is not the case and nothing has changed. The Irids tell Andarna that she's an abomination and they won't let her onto their isle. They scold her for gifting Violet with something so dangerous, but it's not mentioned what it is. They say there's no cure for dark wielders, and when they see Xaden approach, they say that their kind is beyond redemption. Xaden's eyes flare red and everyone sees this. The Irids fly off after refusing to help them in their war, saying that they only deal in peace. Riddick demands answers from Violet after he saw Xaden's eyes. Riddick and Violet go off to talk and hunt after Mira and the others land and are filled in on the Irid's decision. Violet tells Riddick everything, and he's really upset that she didn't tell him until now, and he's reluctant to keep her secret, but he asks for some sort of line that Xaden has to cross for Riddick to be able to intervene. Violet says that if he hurts her friends, civilians, her dragons, or her, then he's clearly not himself, and she'll allow Riddick to intervene. She says that she can't do it herself. Riddick sees Xaden and makes him promise to tell Rhiannon, Sawyer, and Jesinia. They fly back to Basgiath and reunite with their squad. General Atos shows up and gives Violet a letter from Theophany and says that he wants to discuss it in their debrief. He also says that while they were gone, Suniva fell to Dark Wielders and Queen Maria is now dead. In Battle Brief, Devera explains that the Venin attacked the city by riding in within a cloud of a storm, using Theophany to control the lightning, and then they started a fire using her lightning and used a wind signet to spread that fire rapidly. She tells the class that they need to learn from this so this does not happen again, and she asks the class what they could have done differently to change the outcome. Rhiannon suggests that Violet could be the key to this. Sawyer, Riddick, and Violet head down to the archives to meet Jesinia, and Violet tells them all about Xaden slowly turning Venin. Violet has another dream about the Venin Sage and hears Andarna screaming in the distance. The Sage tells her that she'll save her if she submits and joins them. In Flight Maneuver class, Kaori teaches them a dismount that Violet won't be able to complete, so Taryn makes an adjustment for her, and Violet gives Xaden a letter and some custom cuffs made from a broken material from Arisha for his birthday, and he's an Aries, if you're curious. Felix shows up from Arisha to train Violet because he heard that she wasn't training with Professor Carr. Violet says that she could have waited until her Arisha duty in a month, and he says that 2 Wyvern recently breached the wards, and he doesn't think that their failing wards are going to last a month. Xaden is called to Tyrrendor, and he's been gone for over 2 days, but then he comes back for a Cenarium meeting, and Llewellyn and the Duke of Chaldeer get into a fight at the Cenarium meeting, and Xaden and Halden walk out after them. Xaden says that they're going to allow civilians into Tyrrendor and Arisha, and Halden says that if they do, that Navarre's army will show up to attack them. Xaden basically threatens to kill him if he does this, and Halden looks to Arik, who says that he's on Xaden's side. Xaden says that he's headed to the city of Llewellyn in Tyrrendor, and Violet tries to convince him to stay, but it doesn't work out and he flies off. The person Llewellyn tries to lecture Violet on the struggles of dating someone in power, but she's worried that Xaden is slipping and won't be able to control himself outside of the wards. They get ready to leave for their Arisha duty, and Sawyer finally attempts to fly with his dragon, using a new device on his prosthetic leg, but it doesn't work. His dragon agrees to dip his shoulder like Taryn does, and Sawyer is able to fly on him. Dane and Bodhi also join them for Arisha duty, since they had to miss their rune training for their last mission. In Arisha, Violet is cleaning up her and Xaden's old room when Brennan knocks on the door and she lets him in through the wards. He tells her that he can't mend Xaden because he's farther along than Jack was when Nolan tried mending him. Violet asks if he knows Xaden is Venin, and he says yes. He says that they've tried everything over the past week, including giving offerings to temples and sitting with eggs in the hatching grounds. He says they want to try and mend the spot on the earth at Basgiath, and Violet is relieved that they're trying this hard because it means that Xaden hasn't given up yet. Xaden shows up at Violet's door, dripping wet from the storm, and says that Sigale changed course and led them there. He says that he's been waiting until day 76 since channeling, since it's double the stretch of time that Jack had between drainings, and he says that he's at day 73 right now and offers to leave if Violet wants, but she tells him to stay, and they end up sleeping together. Violet has another nightmare of the Sage in a battle at Drathus, but when she looks down at her hands, they're Xaden's hands. She wakes up and it looks like Xaden is also having a nightmare, so she wakes him up and says that she's having bad dreams too. He asks her to tell him about her nightmare, and after she finishes, he says that she was seeing his hands because that was his dream. Xaden asks if she's ever entered someone else's dreams before, and she says that she doesn't think so, but she remembers her dream of the burning building in Cliffsbane, trying to get her family portrait and telling Kat to go because she is the future queen of Tyrrendor. She realizes that this was probably Marin's dream. So Xaden says that her second signet must be dreamwalking because Andarna's kind is peaceful. But Violet says that the Irids had scolded Andarna for giving her something more dangerous than lightning wielding. Xaden says that it is dangerous because it's a form of intrinsic and could get her killed because people can't shield while they're sleeping. Xaden thinks that she developed it when she was cut off from Andarna in the dreamless sleep, and since signets don't work on dragons, it manifested on humans instead. They leave their room and knock on Marin's door and ask to see a portrait of her family, and it's the same one from Violet's dream. Violet asks if she's ever scared of losing it, and Marin says that that used to be her worst nightmare. Just then, Taryn shouts down the bond that a wyvern horde is approaching, and the alarms start to ring. Second and third years all line up and volunteer to fight. Arik tries to get Violet's attention and tells her to protect Dune's temple at all costs. She brushes him off and says that she needs to go, but he whispers that that's how you save Tyrandor. Rhys says that they need to fly out now, and they end up leaving. They see the wyvern, but they're not in formations like before. The dragons start attacking the wyvern, and Violet spots Andarna outside of the walls in front of a statue with 4 wyvern heading for her, and Theophany is on one of those wyvern. Taryn dives and kills 2, but is wounded when one of their wing spurs is embedded in his leg. The other 2 wyvern and Theophany ride off. Rhys uses her signet to retrieve the bone out of Taryn's leg. Andarna is in front of the Temple of Dune, saying that she's listening to Prince Arik's command. 3 wyvern are approaching, and Andarna says that she's staying to protect the temple with the guards. Violet says that her and Taryn are also going to stay, but she tells Rhys and her dragon to get out of there. Violet tells the priestess to get inside for cover, but the priestess says that Dune will protect them, and randomly asks Violet if she uses lye for her hair. Violet says that it just grows in like that, and the priestess responds by saying that she must have come far to protect them. Theophany lands and tells Violet that if she comes with her, she'll let the rest live. The priestess steps up and calls Theophany a heretic, and Violet sees that Theophany's faded forehead tattoo is really a stamp of being a priestess of the Temple of Dune. She has the same silver hair as the attendants in Umbria. 2 other dark wielders emerge behind her, and Theophany looks up and suddenly seems terrified. She yells at the other dark wielders to go now, and she runs toward them, and they all link hands and disappear. The wyvern in the sky start falling, and one falls on the temple, which leaves debris flying all around them, and a huge claw-sized chunk of marble is about to crush Violet when Xaden stops it with his shadows. He said that Sigale flew for them when she felt Taryn's injury, and he said that he was almost there when the wards went up. Violet is questioning how the wards were raised without an Irid, as Leothin, one of the Irids, appears and says that he thought it was necessary to fire their wardstone. Leothin says that he is from Andarna's den and believes that she deserves the chance to learn from them and to choose her path for herself. He says that she has to come with him, and Andarna says that Violet can't leave, and Leothin says that Andarna will have to leave her behind. He says that he powered their wardstone so Andarna would know that Violet would be safe to be left behind, and he says that Andarna can break the bond between her and Violet without harming Violet, if she chooses to leave. He says that after years of learning, Andarna can come back and reforge the bond if she wants to. He asks Violet for permission, and she says that she wants Andarna to be happy and to live, even if that's not with her. Leothin says that that's admirable, and he launches into the sky. Suddenly, Violet can't reach Andarna through the bond, and Andarna keeps looking between Leothin and Violet, and she looks kind of shocked before she flies off to follow him, and then she's just gone. Violet spends nearly 4 days in bed in the aftermath of the bond being severed. Mira shows up and gets her out of bed, and Xaden helps her bathe. She learns that Xaden opened Tyrandor's borders to Peromish civilians against the Cenarium's orders, meaning that he has essentially committed treason. When she leaves the bathroom, Mira and Brennan are fighting after Brennan saw Mira wearing their grandmother's bracelet. Brennan says that their grandmother refused to talk to their mother, and he can't believe that Mira would meet with her. Mira says that she read through her mom's journals and things weren't making sense. There were months missing from the summer that Brennan and Mira spent with their grandmother while their parents took Violet somewhere. Mira says that she thinks that their mom purposely didn't write in her journals because they hauled Violet to Dune's temple to dedicate her, and that's why their grandmother stopped talking to their parents. Brennan says that that's not true because that's been impossible for nearly 200 years, but Violet suddenly remembers that the Umbrish priestess told her that it was a good thing that they didn't complete her dedication, and remembers how her hair matched those attendants. Mira says that the dedication wasn't able to be completed because Violet's future wasn't certain and she had to choose her path. She said that the priestess refused to take her, but said if Violet chose poorly, she could still earn their mentorship, but she would turn venom if she did. Violet interrupts and says that they must have had her dedicated in Umbriel, and says that only her dad must have taken her, since the Isle had never seen dragons before. Brennan asks what the priestess's exact words were, and she says, "The heart that beats for you or within you would do the wrong thing for the right reason. Reach for unspeakable power and turn dark." Xaden then interrupts and says that it's not Violet who will turn, but it's him, and he basically reveals that he's Venom. He says that his heart beats for her, and that he turned to save her and Basgiath. Mira takes out her dagger to attack Xaden, but Violet steps in front of him, and Brennan tells Mira to stop. She realizes that everyone already knew that he was Venom, and she storms out. Xaden was able to read through her shields and see that her intentions were not to tell anyone. Violet starts training again, and Quinn helps her with runes now that she doesn't have Andarna's delicate power to weave from. Bodhi tries to leave for the front lines, but Xaden tells him that he's next in line for the throne and he has to stay back to learn how to rule. Violet enters Xaden's dream again, but this time she realizes it's not her dream and she's able to enter as herself. Xaden sees her in there and says that she shouldn't be there. The sage shows up and Violet stabs herself to wake up and then wakes Xaden up after her. Garrick pounds on their door, and when they open it, he's all bruised and bloody and says that Venom reached the walls of Drathus, and Theophany intercepted him and gave him a message for Xaden and Violet, which says that they have 5 hours to bring Violet and your brother, which they interpret to mean Bodhi, to her or she dies, and Violet realizes that they must have Mira. They know they can't save Mira and defend Drathus, so Brennan tells Violet that she needs to choose one path or she'll fall right into their trap. She chooses killing Theophany to save Mira, and Xaden realizes that they weren't talking about Bodhi when they requested his brother. They're asking for Jack Barlow. They reach the field with Theophany, and Garrick uses his distance-wielding signet to get Jack Barlow from the dungeons and bring him in a chest. When they open the chest with Jack, Theophany throws a dagger, and it doesn't kill him, but they're all kind of confused as to why she's trying to kill him because he's a fellow Venom. She says that Violet will turn within minutes and wonders what will make her turn. She slits Mira's throat, and when Violet runs after her, she launches into the sky on a wyvern, and the battling starts. Brennan and Violet race towards Mira, and Brennan begins bending her, but he doesn't have enough power. Dane and Sloane arrive, and Sloane says that she has something from Auric that she needed to give Violet, and it's an unopened scroll from the Isle of Dune. And this is addressed to Auric. Sloane uses Dane's power to siphon into Brennan so he can finish mending Mira, and he does so, but she's still unconscious. He flies her out while they try to figure out a way to free Mira's dragon from the chains. Xaden goes off to help Drathus while it's under attack, and Brennan tells Violet not to forget her mission. Violet sees that both Brennan and Dane don't have marks on their skin where Sloane siphoned power. Bodhi says that they have an issue because Tiny, Mira's dragon, won't wake up and she'll be vulnerable if she stays. Taryn is the only dragon big enough to carry her off, but he doesn't want to leave Violet. She demands that he go to save Tiny and thus Mira's life, and he tells her to stay on the field until he's back. Theophany appears again and halts the daggers that Violet is throwing in midair. Bodhi tries to counter Theophany's signet, but it doesn't work because she's not a lightning wielder, she's actually a storm wielder like Violet's mom, and she's even more powerful than her mom. She starts wielding heavy winds, and Violet tells Bodhi that he needs to leave before the wind makes it too hard for his dragon to launch. He is protesting as his dragon grabs him and hauls him off, and Violet is left to face Theophany alone. Theophany summons wind that uproots a tree and leaves Violet hidden for just enough time for her to throw an explosive at Theophany, and it knocks her into the air, which makes the wind stop as she falls. Violet attacks her and stabs her thigh, while Theophany holds Violet's wrist with her other dagger and has a knife to her throat with her other hand. She points out that wyverns are headed for the pass where civilians are escaping, and she tries to get Violet to channel to save them all, but Violet says that she can't be everywhere at once and she doesn't have to be. Now we get into Rhiannon's point of view, and it shows her, Riddick, Sawyer, Kat, Marin, and the rest of the Flyers and their squad that are defending the pass. The wyverns approach and they go after them, and Rhiannon sees Riddick use his signet to freeze the blood of the wyvern, making them drop and crack in two when they hit the ground. We also see in Rhiannon's point of view here that her priorities are to the greater good and the civilians, whereas in Violet's point of view, we're seeing that her friends and her loved ones are always her main priority. Back in Violet's point of view, she says that her friends will continue fighting long after she meets Malik, and says that she won't turn. She waits for Theophanie's shock, and then she headbutts her and kicks her up and off of her. Theophanie starts draining the ground below Violet and says that she can just wait for another lightning wielder. Violet jumps on a fallen wyvern back to avoid being drained as Sigale plucks her from the sky and drops her onto Taryn's back within a cloud before flying off again. When they look back, Theophanie is already gone and a huge horde of wyvern is incoming. To get to Theophanie, Violet starts wielding lightning to strike these wyvern down, and she hits at least 34 of them. She spots Theophanie and she heads for her on Taryn's back, killing wyvern as they go. Theophanie summons a huge tornado, and Taryn tells the riot to ground, but Imogen and her dragon Glain remain in the air to fight. Now we see Imogen's point of view, and she's fighting in the sky, and she sees dark wielders headed for the tower where Quinn is. So she heads there, and Dane sees her heading there, and he meets her on his dragon. They jump off, and the Venin start to wield fire their way, but Imogen takes Dane's shield and turns it to stone, and she presumably does this with a secret second signet, and then they're safe from the fire. Imogen's dragon tells her that they're down on weapons, and says that Garrick is using his signet to get more. Imogen enters the tower and sees Quinn fighting with a Venin, and using her signet to project multiple versions of herself. Imogen kills the Venin from behind, and when they fall, Imogen sees a poison-tipped dagger protruding from Quinn's chest. Quinn is dying, and she tells Imogen to tell Jax, who is Quinn's girlfriend, that she loves her and encourages Imogen to tell him how she feels. Side note here, I thought that Quinn and Imogen were dating this whole time, but apparently not. Apparently they're best friends. We get this backstory into Imogen and Quinn first meeting right after Parapet and them becoming best friends. But Quinn ends up dying, and Dark Wielders start to drain the tower from the bottom up, so Garrick shows up with the weapons and helps Imogen bring Quinn's body up to the top of the tower. Garrick says that every rider needs to get there and disarm if they're going to live through this. Violet is heading for Theophanie and is sending lightning strikes her way, but she keeps missing. Theophanie starts creating a hailstorm, and one of these pieces of hail shatters Violet's conduit, making it nearly impossible at this point for her to aim the lightning at Theophanie. Violet keeps aiming and attempting to send strikes at her, but Theophanie is dodging them all. A net falls down on top of Taryn and Violet, and they plummet, but Taryn breaks their fall, and Violet is able to get out through one of the holes in the net, while Taryn uses lesser magic to break through the rest of the net. Violet finally opens a letter from Auric, and included with the letter, she sees a stone dagger made from a piece of the Temple of Dune, and with that is a note in Auric's handwriting that says it's for when she loses hers, and tells her to strike in the dark. The letter itself is from a priestess at Dune's temple, saying it's a gift from one servant of Dune to another. I must warn you, only those touched by the gods should wield their wrath. I will pray to her that she need not use it to avoid reacquainting herself with the other who carries her favor. Her path is not yet set. Theophanie approaches, and Violet taunts her about Umbriel and how she left the Isle. Theophanie says she left the service of a god to become one herself. She sees a massive wave of shadows headed for them, and it envelops them in darkness. She knows that Xaden isn't able to channel this much power from just himself and Sigale, and she whispers down the bond that she loves him. Taryn yells at her to strike in the darkness, and she remembers Auric's letter and realizes that he has actually manifested a signet. It's precognition, and this signet is why he knew that she had to defend Dune's temple and what she needed to do today. She strikes with her lightning, and Theophanie rolls away, but she hits an invisible wall. Andarna reveals herself, and Theophanie is so shocked by seeing an Irid that she doesn't see Violet stab her in the heart. She laughs and says that stone doesn't kill Venin, but then she realizes it's made from Dune's temple, and Dune is wrathful after her priestess turned her back on her. Then she starts to desiccate, and Violet passes out from burnout. Now we're in Xaden's point of view, and he's with Sigale. Sigale was also ensnared in a similar net that Taryn was, and Panchek is also there with his dragon, who is also ensnared in a net. The sage Berwin is there, and Xaden realizes that he didn't successfully kill him, clearly, and he sees that Panchek is the traitor who's been selling out their locations. Beyond Berwin is a new initiate or brother to Xaden, and his identity isn't revealed, but Xaden is shocked because he knows this person and he thinks this person is the last person who would turn Venin, and alludes to the fact that this person knew that Xaden was Venin, which could only be one of a few people. Panchek says that he can't kill him because he's the only one who can give him access to his son, but Berwin says that he has another son and kills Panchek's dragon with an alloy dagger and then heads for Sigale. Sigale tells Xaden not to channel to save her, but he says that he has to. Xaden starts to channel and he can feel his soul breaking apart and power replacing it, turning it to ice. He uses his shadows to kill all of the Wyvern and Venin in the battlefield, but his power somehow skips over Berwin and his new brother, since this Venin bond does not allow for it. He pushes Theophany to the ground, regardless of her rank, and he hears Violet in his head saying that she loves him, which basically stops him from breaking his soul apart completely. He stops channeling, but he's no longer an initiate. He has these red veins branching from his eyes that look like her, presumably Violet's, lightning, and he has an ominous and extremely confusing conversation with Sigale about doing something that's the only way, and Sigale says that Taryn won't let him near her, and he says that she'll help, she promised, and Xaden says, someone owes me a favor. No one is ever named, so it could possibly be Andarna or Violet he's talking about, or someone completely different. And then he asks Sigale to persuade Taryn, and she says that she'll ask, and says her decision will determine our fate. Then they fly off. Violet wakes up groggy outside of Ryerson House, and Brennan and other guards approach them. Andarna tells her that she won't let them kill her, and Violet doesn't understand why she would say this. Brennan and Wheelson say 4 riders, their dragons, and 3 elders were killed, 4 dragons are missing, including Xaden, and 6 eggs are missing from the hatching grounds. Wheelson says Violet is the fastest way to him, but Brennan stops him. He asks if she knows where Xaden is, and she says no. She can't feel the bond, and Taryn is resting, so she can't ask him. Violet looks down and sees a huge ring on her ring finger and a letter with Dune's seal. Brennan opens it and sees that it's a legal binding of marriage between her and Xaden, and there's a note from Xaden that says, "Don't look for me, it's yours now." Violet asks Imogen what she did, and she replies by saying, "What you asked me to," which is maybe alluding to the fact that Imogen used her signet on Violet. So that is the end of the book. If you have any suggestions for books that I summarize in the future, leave a comment below, and tune in with me for the next summary.